Curtis, if you want to, I think we are a committee of 27 right now, if I did the math right yesterday, and I've had 2 to 3 regrets that we received in the last 24 hours. So
we're ready?
I think we can be ready. I will look to see if we have other people having difficulty logging on, but I think we can start.
Hello, folks. Curtis Buman here from the Disability Services Division of the Department of Human Services. And we're, I think, ready to convene this month's February 27th Waiver Reimagine Advisory Committee. My name is Curtis Buman. I'm a manager in Disability Services Division. I have light skin, brown hair, and you might see me occasionally popping my reading glasses on. So I'm here to walk us through the agenda, and one of the things I'm going to be doing as we move ahead is I'm going to put a icebreaker question in the chat that you can respond to by just saying whatever you want to say about yourself and answering the icebreaker question. Just a chance to get us talking and chatting together and getting familiarized in lieu of a long string of introductions. So I'll get to that momentarily, but I think we're ready for the next slide. So agenda today. After we finish up this welcome, we're going to walk through a change in the facilitation of this meeting. And we've been doing this meeting for, I should have looked this up before the meeting today, but at least 3 years. And we're moving into a facilitation change, so we'll walk through that momentarily. We're going to give you some project updates and open it up for some Q&A, some questions and answers. Then we're going to move into a budget presentation and conclude with a facilitated discussion. So at this point, I'm going to, I think we're ready for the next slide, Adrian. And I'm going to introduce our Assistant Commissioner, Natasha Mers, who's going to talk us through the next several slides. Welcome, Natasha.
Thanks, Curtis, and thanks to everyone for being here, and really happy to be at our February Waiver Reimagine Advisory Council meeting. So I'm going to walk through the next few slides for all of you. As Curtis mentioned, we've determined that a change in facilitation would make a lot of sense right at this particular point in the project and in our work with you. So Alliant has been with us for a very long time, and we're grateful for the work that they've done and the help and support that they've provided to DHS. But I also want to acknowledge, and heard loud and clear from this group that sometimes the approach of facilitation that we were taking with Alliant wasn't aligned and supportive of all RAC members. And so we really wanted to be responsive to that concern and look at a change in facilitation approach, change in facilitator approach. So I did want to mention that we have Jessica and Katie from the Office of Dispute Resolution that are here listening and going to give us a little bit of advice today. They will be facilitating a discussion with you at the end of our meeting about kind of what you're looking for in facilitation to make sure that we have a really successful structure that incorporates all your feedback going forward. So you will hear more from them later, but wanted to acknowledge that they're on the meeting with us today to listen and hear what you all have to say and listen to the discussion that we're going to have. Next slide. All right, so just a little bit of grounding in where we've been and where we're going. It's been a couple months since we've met, and certainly a lot has changed in the interim time. So wanted to just kind of walk through, you can see what's on the slide there, but that 23-24 has really been about policy development, engagement. The revision of Min Choices launched in 2024. And so where we're headed next, we're in 25, as you all know. So looking to refine policy guidance, draft plans for 2 new waivers, waiver plan amendments, and I will talk about that in more detail in the next slide. We are gathering updated data on services and supports for the Min Choices revision. And then, of course, we're also working behind the scenes on some of our IT systems to plan and make changes that we would need to implement. So 2026, looking forward, we would look to be, continuing to analyze Min Choices and MMIS data. So for those of you that don't know, MMIS is our Minnesota Medicaid Information System. So that is the system that providers use to bill Medicaid for services. And it's also the system that lead agencies use to enter service agreements. So it's the bridge between services being delivered and providers being paid for those services. And of course, continue with external stakeholder engagement and prep partners for implementation. And I wanted to re-emphasize, I hope you all saw the announcement that went out earlier that we have pushed the implementation date of Waiver Reimagine out to Jan 1 of 2027. So that is our date that the forecast has been updated to reflect, the state budget forecast has been updated to reflect that date. And I'll walk through that in more detail on the next slide, please, Adrian. So I'm going to talk through a few important things here. As I mentioned before, we have gotten guidance and clarification from the governor's office that they do expect us to implement Waiver Reimagine in 2027 and implement it as, it's currently written in state law, which is that 2 waiver structure. So what I want to acknowledge for sure is that this group has raised a lot of different concerns about a 2 waiver structure. I think in particular that the budgets under the residential supports waiver are higher than the individual waivers in some of the sample ranges that we've showed to you and other members of the public in various reports. So the other piece of context that's changed and that I think needs to inform our work is the state budget forecast that has continues to see really accelerated growth in spending under the waiver structures as they currently exist today, and that's putting a lot of pressure on the state budget overall. And so one of the things when I'm done here with my slides is we have experts from our state forecast and budget office that are going to walk through the specifics of that. And I asked them to come and said that this would be an important presentation for all of you and all of us today to be on the same page about some of the different spending pressures that are occurring in our state budget and we want to work with you to figure out how we can meet the needs of the changing fiscal realities and still implement Waiver Reimagine in a way that makes sense. So I realize that it's not an easy conversation. It's a complex conversation. And it is where we are and where the state budget is today. So I'll be looking to this group. We'll all be looking to this group to help us figure out within the constraints that we have with state spending, how can we implement Waiver Reimagine in a way that's really successful? And I think we can and will discuss what it would look like to bring the individual supports waiver up to the same amount of spending as the residential waiver. But I think it's important to know that that doesn't seem like a fiscal reality going forward. And so we're going to have to figure out together what this looks like. But I do think it starts with a foundational conversation about what are the realities of the budget, what kind of growth are we seeing in costs on the disability waiver, and what does the future look like? I think the last point I'll make is that I know a lot of concerns that you all have raised about, again, the difference in support ranges under the 2 waivers. It relates to very legitimate policy and kind of policy concerns and like Olmstead considerations in the sense of why would we be paying so much more for people to live in residential settings when we want to incentivize them to be living in their own homes and community-based settings and accessing all kinds of services and supports, not just waivered services. And I think that is our policy direction. That has been our policy direction. But what you'll see is that Minnesota's already paying a lot more on the residential services. Those are the primary cost drivers of the increased costs to the forecast. And so what that means is that the sort of bias or the differentiation between how much Minnesota currently pays for residential services is inherently, is sort of baked into how Minnesota's been doing business for a really long time. And that was in some ways an artifact or a result of deinstitutionalization and building up community residential settings or quote unquote 4-person group homes. So I think what you're seeing in the support ranges and the differences between those proposed support ranges is just reflecting reality. And so if we want to make a significant change to that reality, and we feel we've done some of that in our early calculations that we can talk through that, we have to make those changes in the context of a diminishing amount of money or a real shift in the state budget forecast. So I hope that you'll hang in with us. And we have Peter Butler from our budget director from ATSA and Courtney Jones that are going to walk through that with you. And then, certainly, of course, this is a really big, meaty, difficult point of discussion. And while, again, it's not going to be an easy conversation, I really am looking for your feedback and your help so that we can co-create this going forward within, again, the existing political reality, the fiscal realities that we have. And then the last piece of news I want to share is we have also, I wanted to talk about some of the things that we've done differently based on your feedback already. So a couple things that I want to mention. First, we talked about a facilitation change, and we'll have more time in our agenda to talk through that later in the meeting. The other thing that we've really talked about is the need, or that you've shared with us that we have really taken to heart, is this idea that you can't separate Waiver Reimagine from other big projects or initiatives such as MnChoices. So we really, I think in the early days of meeting, we're trying to keep those things separate because in our minds that it made sense to keep them separate, and it got really complicated when you started talking about them in context for each other. But we recognize that your feedback, it was very clear that we needed to incorporate that piece into how we talk about Waiver Reimagine. So one of the things we've done at the department is we've stood up what we call a complex project structure and brought in project management support from internal resources in the department to establish really clear decision-making structures. And for the scope of that complex project, we've included Waiver Reimagine, the MnChoices, kind of the data and reliability piece of MnChoices, and also the HCBS person portal, so that as we're moving forward with each function within that project, we are all working together as a team to make sure that the decisions we're making on each component of the project are making sense together. So that complex project, you might not sort of hear about that. This is really an internal effort within DHS, but prior to Commissioner Harpstead's departure, she understood how very, very important it was to have the right support to keep all these moving parts kind of swimming forward together, given how complex it is. And so certainly Temporary Commissioner Gandhi has also really expressed support for continuing with the complex project, and then it's helping us manage our work a little bit better and figure out catch interactions before we miss them. And so I've been very grateful for that. It is a big effort, but I think it is really necessary for the scope and scale of this project and the ever-changing dynamics. So that's what I have to share with you today, and I'll be on for the rest of the meeting and anxious to hear conversation and anxious to get your feedback. What I would say is I'm going to hand it off to Peter for the budget presentation and hold your questions until after that. He has just a few slides to walk through, so make sure you're writing your questions or your comments down as you go, so that when we come back to the discussion, we can do that. So with that, I will hand it off to Peter.
Thank you, Natasha. And I just want to triple check. Can everybody hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you, everybody. And as Natasha said, I'm Peter Butler, and I'm the Budget Director for the Aging and Disability Services Administration at DHS. My colleague, Courtney Jones, is with us as well, and we're going to just walk through a couple slides sort of at a high level about what type of budget trends we're seeing. So what I thought we'd start with is just try to show just what does the current budget look like overall for the state. So you're going to see two pie charts on the screen, and the first one showing the current biennium, which is the fiscal year 24-25 biennium. And then the second slide there is showing the fiscal 28-29 bienniums. And what this is trying to illustrate is just what the state spends general fund dollars on. So you can see on the left that human services is just about 30% and education's a little over 30% there. But by the time we get to the 28-29 biennium in 4 years, we're going to be looking at health and human services increase to be roughly 37% of the budget, and education is going to continue to grow a little bit as well, being 36% of the budget. So the reason we're showing this is just to show that when we're thinking about like increasing costs and some of the fiscal situations for the state, we're thinking about how education, health, and human services combined are approximately 70% of the state's budget, and that percentage is continuing to grow both for education and health and human services. The other thing I'll just note, and I know we have it at the bottom of the slide, is that if we zoom out and look at just what all funds are, so federal funds, funds we maybe get from fees and other sort of special revenue funds, health and human services is actually almost half of the entire fiscal 24-25 biennium. It's approximately 46%. Next slide, please. So part of the reason that we're here today is just to talk about growth and disability waiver spending. So what this chart's trying to show is what the combined cost is for the 4 separate waiver programs. So you can see that overall, CADI and DD make up the vast majority, and then there's much smaller amounts of spending attributed to BI and CAC. But what you can see here is that this starts in 2019 and goes all the way through fiscal year 2029. The reason you see asterisks for fiscal years 25 through 29 is because these are what we're currently forecasting as of our November forecast. So the state releases 2 forecasts every year. We have a forecast that comes out in November that shows the predominant amount of change across year-over-year programs like Medicaid and education formula changes and tax revenue assumptions. And then we do an updated forecast in February every year to help the legislature prepare for any sort of bills they might spend on. Just as kind of a programming note with that, the February forecast this year is coming out March 6th, so that's a week from today. So this chart right here is going to need to get updated next week after we have the forecast released. But again, I think that this just illustrates how we continue to have increased spending growth, not only in the past few years, but we're projecting continued growth over the next budget horizon. Next slide, please. So one of the things we've been asked, whether from the governor's office or from members of the legislature or members of the public, is why do we think there are increases in waiver spending? And we try to view it as 3 different buckets. So there's people, and we'll talk about that in a moment. There's the actual services themselves, and then there's the payment methodology. So, we have these 3 buckets here with a few of the bullet points, and I'll run through them quickly, knowing that we can talk more about it at the end with questions. But when we're thinking about people, what we're seeing in terms of trends is that there are more people accessing the waivers. There's an increase in terms of racial diversity, in terms of both younger and older adults accessing the waivers, and then also the increases in a prevalence of disability or diagnosis nationally. So, some of these trends are specific to Minnesota, but some of these trends certainly have a national flavor as well. When we're looking then at the next bucket with services, there's the increase in both the number and type of services authorized. There's an increase in the volume of units authorized. The increases are both for non-residential and residential services. And as expected, residential services continue to be a larger cost driver in the waiver programs overall. Finally, when we're thinking about payments, over the years, the legislature has made different changes to the DWRS framework. We've had increases in payments, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And there's also an increase in use and rate exceptions, especially in residential services. And the reason we like sort of showing this 3-legged stool is because of the fact that we know that I think that there's an expectation that there's sort of a one-size-fits-all approach of how can we deal with rising costs. And our approach is no, there's multiple facets to this public policy question. Next slide, please. So, I had mentioned in the previous slide that part of the trends we're seeing is that there are more older adults being served. So on the left there is just talking a little bit about just baby boomers in general retiring and how that might have a different trend of what fiscal impacts might be in the nursing facility and elderly waiver space. However, what we're seeing in waivers is also really interesting. What we're seeing is that there's already some shifts, especially within CADI usage for this group. So one of the things that we've noticed is that when you look at our data from January of 2023, there's almost as many CADI enrollees in the age bracket of 65 to 70 as there was an elderly waiver. And in both groups, that's about 3,700 individuals. What I think is also interesting is that when you're looking at that group again of age 65 to 70, there's just more folks receiving any sort of long-term care services. So that could be nursing homes, elderly waiver, caddy. And just down at the bottom of the slide is trying to illustrate how this has grown in caddy. So in 2015, about 23% of this population in that 65 to 70 age bracket was enrolled in caddy. But by 2023, it had increased to 43%. Next slide, please. I think another thing that we just wanted to emphasize is that there's more children being served as well. So what you're seeing here are two different bar charts, the one on the left from fiscal year 2020 and the one on the right from fiscal year 2023. The section that's in blue shows what are people who are age 25 or younger versus the green, which is people older than 25 or younger. And you can see that the share that is 25 or older has dropped from 82% in fiscal year 2020 down to about 65% in DD. And the change for caddies a little less dramatic, but it's dropped from 92% to about 85% at that time. Next slide, please. So, again, one thing we were talking about too is that just racial diversity is improving in the waivers as well. So this just shows all of our different services. So PCA, elderly waiver, disability waivers, ICFDD in nursing homes. And you can just see that over time since fiscal year 2020, all of them have increased for the most part, but you can see that for disability waivers, it stands out with nearly a 6% increase in terms of just the non-white versus BIPOC populations compared to some of the other programs where the changes are a little more modest. Next slide, please. So again, one of the things that we're really interested in is trying to understand where is this cost driver coming from. And so this chart again is just showing DD and caddy in terms of their cost trajectories. And this is from 2013 going all the way out to projected fiscal year 2029. And again, what I think we're seeing is that a lot of this increase in disability waivers is coming directly from average monthly costs increasing. I think that if you looked at forecast documents, not just this year, but over the last several years, we would say that this is a similar pattern that we've noticed. It's just that as this pattern continues to compound year over year, it becomes a larger share of state spending. Next slide, please. Just to dig a little more into the weeds, we are seeing that more services are being authorized. Additionally, we're seeing that different services are being authorized with residential services still being the highest cost. We're seeing a decreasing use of lower cost MA state plan services, which means that maybe folks are shifting to caddy instead, which again could have a different cost differential for the state. And then again, I think I mentioned earlier, we're seeing that rates are just increasing in general. And there's a little more data here on this slide, and I know that sometimes going through each bullet can be a little aggravating for folks. So I can just pause for a moment for folks to take this in, and we can come back to talk about this slide if there's questions about it. Next slide, please. And I think just another way to illustrate what the previous slide with bullet points was trying to show, we're looking here at different types of waiver services and what their average rate was in fiscal year 2020 compared to fiscal year 2023. And you can see, depending on the service, independent living skills, maybe not so much of a change with the 4% increase, but for other things like family residential services or customized living services, you're seeing 30 or 40% increases over about a 3.5, 4-year period. So one of the things that we're just continuing to track is that that's pretty considerable growth over a 4-year period, and trying to anticipate what the next 4 years will look like for the state. We're trying to understand how to not only curb some of that growth, but really understand why that growth is occurring in the first place. I believe that these are the most slides. Oh, my apologies too. I just saw a comment in the chat talking about reading through all the slides. So if folks like, I'd like to go back to the previous slide just to read through it. My apologies there. So just reading through this slide real quick as well. So at the very top, we have the more services are being authorized. So on caddy and DD, there's been about 167% more units were billed per person in fiscal year 2024 compared to fiscal year 2021. The authorized to build ratio remained relatively unchanged throughout that time period. It was about 83%. Looking at that second bucket, we have the different services that are being authorized. And again, residential services are still the highest cost. So growth in non-residential services continue to grow, But at the same time, the residential services cost 3 to 4 times more than non-residential services. So one of the things that we've noticed is that there is decreases in the percentage of DD recipients receiving residential services, but for CADI, that's really not changed very much, which means that there's total growth in the total amount of services and costs necessary for that number of CADI recipients. Looking at that third bucket again, I mentioned that there was a decreased use of lower cost MA state share services. So since fiscal year 2021, there's been about 10% fewer folks who are using the HCBS plans through the state plan, while CADI is serving about 27% of more people. And then finally, just talking about rates again, the DWRS inflationary adjustments have came in higher than previously forecasted, and then exception rates are increasing. Exceptions make up approximately 22.5% of all DWRS spending, and 90% of that is in residential services. And then I think that was the end of our slide. So I'm very happy to take questions. And I know Courtney's here for questions that I don't know the answers to. And thank you again for letting us come here to talk a little bit about the budget.
Hi, this is Kelly Friesen. Should we just unmute ourselves and go ahead, or are we going to be called on?
I am happy to call on folks, so please go ahead, Kelly.
Okay, thank you. I just want to clarify. So a lot of this, there's been a significant change since 2020. I'm trying to understand with the different waivers, are we letting people access waivers that have needs outside of disability? I mean, I'm trying to think of what's changed in the last 4 or 5 years. And I mean, I know we have a lot of more undocumented citizens in our state right now. So I don't know if they're being allowed to access some of these services, or are we treating addiction services, you know, with these waivers, or what else are we just keeping these services and these waivers to people with disabilities? Or are we expanding them to other populations is my question.
Hey, Kelly, thanks for your question. This is Natasha. I can take that one. Just to address a couple of your questions directly, you know, waivers, the eligibility requirements for waivers have not changed. So people need to meet a nursing facility level of care in order to access these waivers, and they have to meet the financial and the categorical medical assistance eligibility. So someone needs so there are some types of immigrants and refugees that can access Medicaid services, but typically undocumented folks cannot. So that is not a driver in costs under the waiver. I think, you know, what I can also say is the diagnoses of people being served hasn't really made a shift over time. So the increase in costs that we're seeing really are attributable to the things, the kind of that three-legged stool, as Peter described it before, of increasing authorizations, rates that have been increased through inflationary updates and other things, as well as rate exceptions. So I think the other piece of contextual information that maybe is part of this puzzle is that, you know, DHS doesn't have waiting lists for waivers, and counties have been spending, or the incentives for counties to not overspend their aggregate budgets have been kind of stripped away in law over time, trying to prioritize getting access to people's services. So some of you may remember times where counties would decide if they can afford to put someone on the waiver, and they had prioritization structures. And if they couldn't, you know, if they couldn't afford it, or it was going to be too much for their aggregate budget, they had to figure out how to manage that through reductions in services or having people wait to access. So a lot of those requirements or those incentives for counties have gone away. And so counties really are authorizing more services and supports for people as a major cost driver.
Okay, I appreciate that, Natasha.
Answer the question?
To clarify then, our waivers right now are only being used for people with disabilities, not for any other diagnoses or addictions or housing for people that need housing that don't necessarily have a disability? Just to clarify, it's yes or no?
Well, I can't give you a yes or no answer that's accurate. So there isn't a list of disabilities that will or won't put you on the waiver. It's about the intensity of the needs that you have. So I talked before about needing to meet a institutional level of care to access the waiver. And what that means is that the person has to have needs that are significant enough that they would otherwise be in a nursing home or an ICFDD or other type of institutional setting if they didn't have services and supports in the community. They do have to have a disability diagnosis broadly through, either the state medical review process, or for people that are, of course, 65 and older, that's a pathway as well. So they have to meet a broad sort of a definition of disability that's fairly broad, but it's not diagnosis specific. Certainly the specific diagnoses like brain injury or a CAC often come with different diagnoses. But the issue is a general disability diagnosis. You meet the financial eligibility requirements, and you have an intensity of need that would otherwise require you to be in an institution to access to meet health and safety needs.
Thank you.
I have a question. I don't know if there's anyone else with their hand up. I can't see.
I have my hand up, but go ahead. This is Pat.
Okay, sorry, Pat. Are you sure?
Oh, no worries. I mean,
Okay.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So something that I noted here is that it said among all people aged 65 and 70 receiving long-term care services through Medicaid, um, in 2015, 23% were enrolled in CADI, and in 2023, 43% were enrolled in CADI. So can you guys talk a little bit about what that means? Does that mean that the services under elderly waiver are inadequate for our older adults right now? And is that why folks are choosing to stay on the CADI waiver? And then the other thing that I wanted to say is that it kind of seems like the CADI waiver is a catch-all for everything, because there are folks that would probably be better suited on the other waivers that are just put on the CADI waiver by default. So is there anything, is there any data around that and kind of highlighting why this is happening? And it seems like the CADI waiver is really being used a lot for older adults as well. So just feedback around that.
Yeah, thanks, Anya. I will maybe provide some answers, and then I'd certainly invite anyone else on the DSD team or the budget folks if you have additional information to round it out. So I think regarding your question about people that are now 65 and older accessing CADI, I think you're absolutely right, Zania, that we're seeing people that are choosing to stay on CADI, after they turn 65, where they could theoretically access elderly waivered services, but we typically see that people choose to stay on CADI because it doesn't have a budget cap. So as many of you may know, elderly waiver has budget caps with currently no ability to have a rate exception or an exception to that cap. So you are given, the lead agency is given a budget to work within based on that person's case assessment. So I think there isn't a real benefit of moving to elderly waiver if you're already on CADI. And so to me, I think it's just a rational choice for people to stay on CADI. And if, as Peter said, people are younger are accessing waivers, and then they're sort of aging, and therefore the utilization of CADI is increasing. Related to kind of and I will say on elderly waiver, we are working on implementing a budget exception for EW, because for people that come on and don't have access to CADI or the disability waivers, and they have exceptional needs, it is very challenging to find a provider to serve them. So just a note on that piece. So in terms of, CADI kind of being the catch-all, what I would say about that is one of the things that we've been working on as part of Waiver Reimagine Phase 1 was aligning the service menu that's available to people across the disability waivers. So whereas, before we did that, CAC maybe had different types of services, or they were named this different things, but did the same, functionally the same thing. Same thing on BI and DD. So I think CADI is a catch-all because it's maybe you don't need a specific diagnosis. Like with the brain injury waiver, you do have to have a traumatic brain injury and meet a certain functionality there. So I don't know that Well, and the same time, none of the disability waivers have upper limits or budget caps. And so I don't know that moving people that maybe could be accessing the BI waiver, for example, but are on Caddy, I don't know that that from a functional perspective makes any difference in terms of the money and the state trends. So those are my initial responses, but I would want anyone from DHS to weigh in if there's any other trends I might be missing or any clarifications.
Yeah, hi everybody. This is Heidi Hamilton. I just joined. I'm very sorry for being late. I was at another stakeholder meeting with related to CFSS, which is another initiative that we're launching right now in the process of. Anyway, just to add to what Natasha said related to Caddy versus the elderly waiver. The elderly waiver was really designed for people over age 65 and might not meet the needs of people who have had lifelong disabilities or who have become disabled earlier in life. A couple of the things that are not as prevalent in the elderly waiver are those training supports that people might need in order to live independently in the community or live in the community at all. And also, they don't have employment supports on the elderly waiver. So when these programs were created, the assumption was people retire at age 65, and that absolutely happens for some people, but some people do not want to retire at age 65 and want to continue working. So I think we find that it's really rare for somebody to who is on the Caddy waiver to feel like their needs will be met under EW. And so everybody's given the choice when they turn 65 whether to move to EW or stay on Caddy, but that it's very rare. When I first started at DHS, people had to move from the Caddy waiver to the elderly waiver at age 65, and that caused a lot of problems for people. And so we've created more flexibility to allow people to remain on the Caddy waiver.
Thank
Several
you.
of us have our hands up.
Yeah, I see that. So it looks like Julie has her hand up first.
Hi, so I represent an adult child with a disability who's been on waiver services for a long time. And I continue to have trouble understanding the system-wide issues. So I'm going to ask my question from a person-centered approach, and feel free to let me know that someone can follow up with me afterwards. But as we look at these budgets and we are moving towards individuals being able to manage their own budget, I continue to struggle with having really no access to my daughter's, to understanding where her budget is, what it has grown or shrunk over time, and where there's a ability to perhaps be more efficient or more effective with her service providers, which in theory would enable cost savings. So there was really nowhere in that budget overview about like efficiency and effectiveness, I guess, is my bigger question. And then if we're still moving to individuals managing their own budgets in order to help with the costs, where does that fit into this?
Okay, so Jill, I'm just trying to digest your question here. I think the first part was, if I am capturing it correctly, like there isn't a current place for you to go and be able to see kind of the budget or see the services or see the amount that's being spent on services. Did I get that right?
I know Yeah, there's a piece of paper that comes every so often, but let me just give an example. For my daughter, she gets perhaps 6 different annual assessments and goal setting meetings, but so that to me seems a waste right there, and she hates it. Every service provider wants to do it themselves. But then really, there's also no way to give feedback on how you think. So she has employment training, but they're not doing any employment training. So I guess where is the feedback loop to determine how effective the spending on these services is? So it is a multifaceted question, but it's kind of, as you're looking top down, I'm looking at it bottom up, as a kind of an efficiency, effectiveness, and ownership, her ability to own her budget eventually over time. None of that is available. So even if we all wanted to help solve the budget challenges, we have no ability to do it person by person.
Right. Yeah, I think, just in terms of where is the feedback loop, I think we need more of them and more tools than we currently have. We do look to the HCBS person portal as a tool or a mechanism to be able to create more transparency, and then maybe start thinking about how do we evaluate. What I'd like to do is ask anyone from DSD to kind of talk about what are the feedback loops that exist today, understanding that we definitely see room for improvement. And before I hand it off to anyone from DSD, I think part of this too is that in a county administered system that we're delegating a lot of those types of functions and responsibilities to county case managers in terms of doing that service evaluation. And so I think that that's a definitely an area that we could explore as a part of readiness for Waiver Reimagine, is what are the types of information and the types of feedback loops that would actually be meaningful to people that use services. So with that, I will hand it off to maybe Curtis has some feedback.
Well, I'll take a shot at this. You covered a lot of it already, Natasha, but your first stop on this is, of course, the case manager who authorized the services, and being sure to tell them, are you actually getting the service? Is what you're getting, if there's a billable service being provided, what you intended or what was planned? So there's that lane. From a DSD lane, you can contact us at the response center if you have concerns about or questions about the policy and what's going on and need clarification of, is this the service that is intended when I'm authorized for X? You can do that. And also we can engage our licensing staff if there's a deficiency in the provision of the service. That's what's in my head right now. I'm probably forgetting something, but there are avenues, and I'm sure that we'll be exploring more of these and more ways to achieve that accountability.
And Curtis, I don't want to take this group into a deep dive on my particular issue. Is more the idea to amplify that there's an efficiency, effectiveness, accountability missing link, I think, system-wide. But so that's where I'm just like, I'm hoping that's getting looked at somewhere in this project implementation.
And I appreciate that, Julie, and I agree with you. And some of what you're talking about, maybe not all of it, is probably present in the governor's budget proposals. And we'll be looking harder at some of this as we move forward. But yeah, I think you're accurate with your comments. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
And all right, this is Natasha. So I see that Pat and Lisa have their hands up, and I'm sorry, it's harder. I'm kind of dealing with WebEx a little bit here. But let's do
Natasha, here's the order. I'll tell you the order of people.
oh, great.
It's Pat, Trisha, Lisa, Dr. Kate, and that's it. Those are the 4 people that have their hands up right now.
Okay, great. And so I think let's see if we can work through the questions for people that have their hands raised, and then I will hand it off to the Office of Dispute and Conflict Resolution to introduce themselves, and then they can also facilitate the additional questions that are coming up on this topic or any other part of the agenda. So, all right, go ahead, Pat.
Hi. Pat Wright. I am a waiver user, and also I have a son who's on waiver services. I did want to just say that I think it was Zania that was talking about the elderly waiver and the caddy waiver. When I turned 65 a few years ago, I did have the choice, but I was told my budget would probably go down. Recently, just in a few months ago, my case manager, when I had my assessment, said that I would be eligible for more on elderly waiver, but I would lose her because her agency doesn't do elderly waiver. And so I checked it out with the assessment guy, and it was like 3 times what I'm currently getting. And if I switched over to elderly waiver, but I would not give up my case manager for any money. She's just, to me, she's invaluable. So I just wanted to put that out there. And she did say I'd have to switch to like managed care. So I don't know if this is like a managed care deal or, but anyway, there's that. Also, thank you to the woman before, I think it was Julie. Yeah, I have issues with where my son lives and serving hot pockets for dinner, and he needs a special diet. And, I think if there was some way to have some kind of accountability, and, he has refused me getting involved because obviously I could do that, and it's a very small place, and we have raised the issue. So if somebody came in there and was stirring things up, they probably knew who it came from and whatnot. And so, I'm just putting that out there. My question is, so these 4 categories that we just talked about, residential, family residential, independent, and I can't remember what the 4th one was. So I think I know what these are, but so the difference between family residential and I think it was just straight residential. And could you just go briefly through what those 4 categories were?
Thanks, Pat, for both of those comments. And when you say categories, are you talking about, I think you're talking about slide 15 and what those are?
I think so. Yeah.
The
I
community
can't remember
residential
exactly.
services. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I will hand that off to Curtis or someone from DSD that wants to walk through what those services are.
Sure, I can take a stab at it, but I don't have the slide in front of me. I'll start by differentiating between community residential service and family residential service. Family residential service occurs in a family foster care license setting.
Okay.
So those have a different rate framework under, or those will have a new rate vehicle established starting in 2026. They tend to be settings, thank you, that are not shift staffed or don't have actual employees for the most part, but are the person who owns the home has somebody living with them, and that is family residential. It's a much smaller group than the community residential settings. Customized living's a different licensing structure through the Department of Health, a different kind of setting. Again, a different, and I'm sorry, I'm babbling here a little bit, but a different service definition under our waiver plan. Independent living skills with training is an hourly service that's provided to individuals who need the service. I'm going to stop there rather than continuing on to see if I'm getting close to answering your question, Pat, or if I'm
Yeah. No,
meandering
yeah.
off course.
Yeah, my son is in the place that they used to call foster care. And so that's family. And yeah, I'm sure there's a place I can probably find these on the DHS website too.
Yeah. And Pat, the community residential services are what we used to call SLS, or supported living services. That is the group that includes most of our corporate group home settings, for lack of a better expression, to differentiate them from family residential.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Curtis. Appreciate that.
And I just want to address some of the comments that you had made, Pat, related to your case manager. We are seeing a lot of turnover in case management, which I'm sure you are all aware of. And the impact of the workforce shortage is not just direct care workforce shortage, but also at the case management level. So I completely understand why you would make decisions based on access to the case manager that you've developed relationship with. And you mentioned managed care. That was one piece that didn't mention earlier, but the elderly waiver is primarily people are primarily on managed care for the elderly waiver services, and that's not the case for the disability waiver program. So that's another difference that people would need to make a decision about.
Thanks, Heidi.
Okay, and let's move to Trisha next.
Thank you. I just had a couple comments I wanted to point out. One thing about the residential service, when you look at how that's like the highest cost, that really gets me is that costs the most money. It's probably the most restrictive type environment or most institution like. Yet the workers, the staff in those facilities are so poorly paid. So I think that that's something we need to look at, that, there's a staff shortage and the pay within those facilities are not that great. Where is the money going? Like, I sometimes wonder, is it the corporate piece that's kind of the money suck? And I just think it's logical to take a look at that maybe. Because it's really hard, I think, for families to say, I want my loved one to stay at home. They want to stay at home, but we can't afford it. Like, it has to, so we go spend more money to put them in a facility. So that it's the logic I wanted to point out, or maybe a consideration whether that is logic. And then there's also the Olmsted decision. Even what basically it says is that budgets don't assess or drive disability need. And so while I understand we have to look at the reality, the Olmsted decision, or the realities of, budget, um, it- I'm trying to be concise here. It emphasized that like unjustified isolation would be a form of discrimination based on disability. And the states would have to balance their resources while providing services equitably. And I think that is something we need to go back to. Just because the budget's changing, the need doesn't change. And that's a very, very serious thing we need to consider. Thanks.
Tricia, just to respond briefly, I think your concerns on staff wages are shared. I know our legislators have approved substantial additional funding with the intention of impacting those wages. And they've taken a couple of actions that would probably be helpful. First of all, we have cost reporting occurring from providers, where we're eliciting their accounts and finding out how much they're actually paying to staff, among other things. And also the legislature has passed a statute setting wage thresholds where they want to know that providers are paying at least this much to staff. My understanding of that statute, it just doesn't actually have a penalty or a sanction imposed
no,
it,
no
it's
accountability. So
yeah,
it's like, oh, we
but it,
can find out what's going on, but we can't do anything about it.
yeah, and that was a decision by the legislature, and I mean, the accountability would be just to have visibility about what's going on, so it would see the light of day in terms of what's actually being paid. But no, I hear you, and your comments are absolutely legitimate. So, just wanted to point those two pieces out. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks. I don't think it makes me feel any better, but thank you.
Just want to add that the governor's budget this year does include funding and resources to do something about the information that we find. So there are pieces of the governor's budget that includes more staff to focus on enforcement and not just collecting the data.
And if I could kind of circle back a little bit to something that was said earlier, you know, about individuals feeling like there are things in their own waiver or their child's waiver that just don't make sense and might be a waste of money. And I would, you know, I would encourage DHS to seek out that feedback. Maybe not be so passive and wait for people who are already overstretched to reach out and, you know, say, hey, there's wasteful spending in my budget, and risk, you know, risk losing some budget. um, you know, maybe seek us out and find out how we feel about it intentionally, because you might be able to find more wasteful spending there than anywhere else.
Thanks, Trisha. Appreciate both comments and questions. Let's move on to Lisa.
Good morning, Lisa Everett, parent to an adult using the waiver services for, well, approximately 20 years probably now. I've been on this committee, I guess, since the beginning. So anyway, lots of good discussion. So just what I want to point out, and it's an interesting time how we kicked off this meeting as kind of a step back, do over. I don't know what you want to call it, but anyway, so what's striking me so far in this meeting is I want to go back to the beginning comment from Natasha that you recognize that this committee has struggled with the two waiver system, and then having budgeting align in such that seemed unbalanced, that you were providing more budgeting for, I'll say, a licensed setting. So thank you for recognizing that, because you're absolutely right. We have struggled with that from the first meeting. So you're saying that and I know this too, we pay more now in the past for those license settings, and so we're just going to continue to pay more. And I'm sure in part what you meant by that is by nature a license setting is going to be more expensive just because of how it's structured. But we're paying more for those settings now, and we're just going to keep paying more, is what you had said. And then you move forward today to slide 14, when, now correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm reading slide 14 to say that those license settings are costing 3 to 4 times more than if you were in unlicensed, living independent, living with family. Okay, not a surprise to anybody on this call, I'm sure. We know they cost more. So what I want to emphasize is that if we don't, and we as REC, we as DHS, we as Minnesota, if we don't provide appropriate funding in a budget to people that want to self-direct, live independently, live with family in a non-licensed setting, then the only thing we're doing is incenting and pushing with no other alternative to go to those license settings that are 3 to 4 times more expensive. And we've seen so far, and I know our world is changing because of the governor budget and everything coming nationally, but where we've been at so far in 2 years with RAC is that the budget numbers are so devastating to the people that currently self-direct and live in a non-licensed setting. It's not sustainable. It's devastating. That's why I'm on this committee. If we keep going down that way of thinking, and you now have slide 14 that draws out clearly, these licensed settings are terribly expensive. It is unbelievably irresponsible for us as a committee to not find the appropriate balance, to not cut off people at the knees that are currently self-directing, have been doing it for literally decades in some of our examples. Their need has not changed. All they wish for is to be able to get out of bed, brush their teeth, and take their medicine. That's just a perk. And we've heard these stories. And so I just want to emphasize, I mean, correct me anywhere that I'm wrong, but as RAC, we just can't allow that. It's irresponsible, and putting forward proposals that do that so blatantly is just, I can't say it anymore. I've been doing this for 2 years and it's just wrong. And I don't expect to solve this today. I guess what I'm saying is more just my comment and observation. This is kind of a breath of refreshing here that we can sort of start over. I want to recognize that honestly, the landscape in our state with the budget cuts coming from the governor's office, the stuff coming out of the White House, this is all new to all of us, and it's devastating where our life is going. And Natasha and your team, hello, it's got to be miserable. But black and white common sense says this committee is completely a failure and irresponsible if we put forward a proposal that continues to support the most expensive option out there. I can't imagine if you implement Waiver Reimagine with that kind of unbalanced budgeting, and it unfolds to the point that we've had parents say, I have no choice but to place my child. If that unfolds, and now the governor's budget has to recognize that path of what humans' choices were, what would that do to the bottom line budget again? I mean, we can't support it now, we can't support it then. So anyway, I hope that's clear. It's more of a comment than it is a question, but that's where I'm at. And I appreciate sort of this fresh start over, but this is getting very frustrating that we just keep beating down that same path of 2 waivers that make no sense, especially in the budgeting. So, thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Appreciate everything that you've just shared, and I think that's a summary of kind of the rock and the hard place that we're in. One thing I will say is, the numbers that you all are, I think, referencing are in our legislative reports from 2019, and I do think that we really do need to provide at least some high-level updated numbers in terms of the impact of inflation and rates and things on people's budgets. So that might help us. If we're able to do that before we recalibrate budgets, that might help us have a conversation with updated numbers and kind of be able to work off that, specific to the kind of the issue between the differences and cost drivers on the 2 waivers. So I think again, as you mentioned, we're not going to be able to solve that today. But I do think that is the conversation that we need to have with the RAC, is to say, what are the solutions if these solutions are unacceptable? What are the solutions? Understanding that we have an obligation to implement according to state law unless the state law changes, and so we have to be driving towards implementation in 27, and it would take a legislative change to stop this. I think we can make those recommendations and see where that takes us. But I just appreciate what you're sharing, and it's not a new information, but I appreciate the way you kind of summarized it. Okay, and then Dr. Kate, what did you want to say?
I'm a service user. So we have one of the most expensive models for providing care by using residential services. And you are saying we need to keep this model, which is extraordinarily expensive and will increase the numbers of people in residential care because the supports are not able to be accessed by people in the community. And this will increase the total cost instead of revamping the service to a different direction to keep more people in the community at a lesser cost. This is a huge problem, which indicates a serious lack of vision about other options.
Thanks, Dr. Cape.
Tricia's clapping.
All right. So just want to thank people for their comments and their feedback. And this, as I said before, I think this is the fundamental discussion that we need to have. And I think, oh, I'm seeing that. I think what I'm going to do is I recognize other folks have their hands up, but I think what I'd like to do is hand it off to the Office of Conflict Resolution to just introduce themselves, kind of lay some facilitation groundwork. And then Jessica and Katie, maybe if we can then spend some time before the end of the meeting to make sure that everyone that had their hand up or has a comment that they want to share has an opportunity to do that before the meeting ends. Is that okay? A reasonable way to move forward?
That works. And Gina and Polly, I see your hands up and we'll come right back to you. So we're just gonna jump in and let you know who the Office of Collaboration and Dispute Resolution is. So this will just be a little interlude. So my name is Katie Pratt and I am the Director of the Office of Collaboration and Dispute Resolution. And I'm here with Jessica Schrack, who will introduce herself in a minute as well. But DHS reached out to us, letting us know you were going through a facilitation transition with this group. And is this something that we could be a part of helping just steward the group through this transition, making sure that you are set up for success as you continue on as a committee and in your work together, looking back at what has been effective in RAC so far and how you can make the most out of your time together. I understand you still have a couple of years to work together, but I also know that in complex issues, that time can go really fast. So we'll just take a few minutes to explain who we are and how we're going to be working with you in the near term, and then we'll get right back to your questions. So please know that we're coming back. So the Office of Collaboration Dispute Resolution, we are a state office. We are located in the Department of Administration, but we exist in statute. And we have a broad mandate to help Minnesotans collaborate better, to work on collaborative problem solving and solve issues that are in the public interest. So we work on a whole range of topics. We work with state, local, tribal governments. We work across all three branches of government and any issue area. So we are not subject matter experts on health and human services or education or environment or any of the other topics that come to us. So that's who we are. And just the next slide, please. So again, just sort of what our charge as an office is: the sustainable resolution of matters of public interest, effective collaboration and dispute resolution in state and local government, and the broad use of community mediation throughout Minnesota. So we are part of a much larger network in Minnesota of facilitators and mediators and people who help Minnesotans work together to get needs met. And especially our office really focuses on when there are complex issues that there is no easy answer, no magic wand solution. And it really takes the creativity and collaboration of many different groups and perspectives to make the wisest decisions that you can under the circumstances. So that's kind of where we land. Just a little bit about me. So I have been I've been in this role for about 2.5 years. I was in state government previously in a different role working on environmental issues. I have a background in geography, and as my colleague Jessica just learned yesterday, I have an undergraduate degree in zoology. Fun fact. So it was a long pathway from here to working on what I do now, but I love it and get to interact with wonderful people. And Jessica, I will turn it to you to just say a couple words about yourself.
Sure, sounds good. Thank you, Katie. It's good to be in this space with everyone today. I'm Jessica Chirac, the Assistant Director of OCDR. And like Katie, I've been in my role for about 2.5 years. Before that, I was an organizational development consultant and worked with government and nonprofit clients. Before that, I was a quality director and I also have a degree in counseling. So it's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Jessica. So we'll just continue on with this conversation today. We still have a good chunk of time left on this meeting and help field questions and queue up questions. And then also we have questions back for you if there's time. Another thing we just want to give you a heads up about is because this committee is going through a transition, Jessica and I are looking to connect with you outside of your typical every other month meeting space. So between now and your next meeting, which is in April, and just have some small group conversations to reflect more on the process of the committee. What has been working well? What has not been working well? What would you like to see in your next facilitator? What qualities do they hope that you have? How do you hope to make the most out of your time together? So we might have some time to get into that a little bit today, but we for sure want to have some small group conversations. So you will, after today, be receiving a follow-up email with some times when Jessica and I will be opening a call to just, if your schedule allows, please come and give us your feedback. If you would like to talk to us and give us some feedback about the process and those times don't line up, we'll also make ourselves available to make sure we can connect with you. Keep in mind that we are not the subject matter experts. So if you have specific concerns about Waiver Reimagine, we don't have, the content area expertise to tell you yes or no, or, that will work or that won't work, but we can help with the process. How is the conversation going? How is the collaboration going? How do we work together? So stay tuned for that follow-up email. And in the meantime, I think we can take this slide deck back down and we can continue on with our questions. If you have any questions for Jessica or I about our OCDR work too, we're happy to answer those. So I will turn it next over to Gina, who has her hand raised. And for all of you to know, if you do have a question, just use the hand raise feature next to your name, and we will just call on the hands in the order that we have them raised. So thank you. Go ahead,
Hello.
Gina.
Thank you, Katie, for that. I started to preface in our chat a little bit. And I know that on the waiver, that is why we have the committee, because there are people both on the family side and then also on the other side, the residential settings. And I think that's so important. But a couple of the things that I wanted to mention, especially when we're talking budgets, is there's going to be a very delicate balance between both, for sure. And I did say the community living and residential settings are both an increased need. There's many people that would never have care housing if it weren't for the residential and corporate settings as well. One of the current things that we really deal with in both crisis and CRS currently is there's a complete backup again. Because the state did stop us being able to do hotel suites and things like that. So there's another backup, especially for children that are stuck in hospitals and detention centers right now. And they have nowhere to go. There are providers ready to take them, but unless we develop new houses, there's nowhere for them to go. And so I want everybody on the committee just to be aware from the residential and corporate side that there are a lot of kids out there that their families will not even allow them to come back home, even with a provider in the home with them, supporting them around the clock. So there is a very, very high need for these children to have residential providers and corporate as well. And there's an increased need of children just across the state that are like this. They're in the system. The state is actually their guardian, the state or counties, even under child protection. And there's nowhere for them to go unless these residential and corporate settings are increasing their developments right now and then allowing them to come in. A lot of our children are actually sent out of state because there is such a lack of placement in the state. So I really, really wanted to make that point for those who are also on the family provider side. So you guys really understand what it looks like on the residential and corporate side as well. And some of the things that we are actually battling with of trying to get care even within the state. So, you know, these kids can even stay in state. We have children where maybe their family lives way up north and they have to live way down south because that's the only place in the state, or vice versa. So I just really want to make a point to say that there's absolutely going to be a need, but there's an increased need on both sides as well. So as we're working together as a committee, I really hope that we all can hone in on the fact and the understanding of those kind of opposite sides of the road as we're looking at budgets and things going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, and I'll turn it back over to DHS to see if there's any response before we move on.
You know, I think I appreciate those comments, Gina, and I think that is the challenge that we have in front of us today, right? Is making sure that we have a service system that works for all people. And sometimes folks do need to access those residential services, and we need to have those services be available. So I appreciate the point very much, and I think that's just the high-level response I wanted to make.
Great. Okay, we will move on to Polly.
Hi, this is Polly Owens. I got to apologize. I've still got a raspy voice. I'm getting over a cold. I represent the ARC Minnesota as a volunteer, and I am also an independent consumer-directed community support planner. I've got a couple things. First of all, Natasha, thank you for participating. Your involvement has been awesome. Heidi, if you're still on here, I want to thank you for last time you sent a link to a site for individuals getting CDCS who's had their budgets cut by over like $10,000, but their needs haven't changed. I sent that out to the families I work with that have had that happen, and they've been able to, the majority of them have been able to have their min choices assessment relooked at, and most of them have gained back the services that they, or the budget amount that they lost. So those are two things. So thank you guys. I'm very much looking forward, Katie and Jessica, to you guys facilitating this. Like has been said before, I've been on this group since the beginning. Feel like nothing has been accomplished really in the last couple of years. What I would look forward to with you guys facilitating is, because it would take it out of the realm of DHS staff having to facilitate, I would like to, I think that could provide an opportunity for them to come off as more equal partners. So if you're not facilitating, you're a participant and an equal partner. And I think that will be very helpful to have DHS's voice heard as an equal partner. So that's one thing I would really like to have happen as we move forward and kind of start fresh. So thank you.
Thanks for that comment. And DHS folks, if you have any responses or things you want to chime in with, just jump in. Otherwise, I'll kind of just keep queuing up the next questions. Trisha, it looks like you're up next.
Thank you. I think it's important to point out that we know that residential is needed in some cases. It's just that I think we're more concerned about when it's being used for people who don't need it or want to be there, but they're there because of the lack of community services. And I'm going to just respond to what Gina said. I worked in child protection for 3 years. Looking back on what I know, based on what I know now, the majority of the families who are engaged or encountering child protection services, a lot of it was because they had a child with extra needs or a circumstance where needs weren't being met, even close to it. You know, there was such a stark absence of the services, the many services that exist, but they weren't accessing, or they weren't in place, or weren't, you know, the right fit. So, you know, I get that there's a need, but we need to think about how much of a need are we creating by not meeting families' needs in the first place, not meeting disability needs in the first place. Same with incarceration. let's be a little more proactive, I guess, and looking at where we could maybe improve access to save money. Thank you.
Thanks for that comment. Polly, I don't know if you had another comment or if your hand's just raised from before. I'm gonna guess it's raised from before. Is there anyone else with, I don't see any other current hands raised. Is there anyone else with a immediate comment or question? And if not, I have a couple questions for you all. Okay. Please jump in if you want to continue with any of these past topics that have been coming up. But, one of my questions, and Jessica and I are very new, we're learning what all these acronyms mean. We're learning about the complex puzzle and trade-offs that you all are talking about. But thinking about, let's just take 2025, a year is a time we can kind of wrap our heads around. And if you were to look back at 2025 and your meetings together as a group, what would success feel like to you? What, to the point of, what have we accomplished? What would you feel good about looking back in 2025 and saying, I think that was a good use of our time together? Any thoughts on that? Sue, go ahead. Sue, go ahead and unmute yourself if you're able to.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Here I was talking.
No worries.
I'm Sue Mackert. I represent a day and service provider, employment services, and I have white hair and I'm a senior. And I feel that the success for me, I think we have accomplished some things just by being together and discussing various issues, because my role as an executive director of an agency is to go back and figure out how can we cut, how can we do this, how can we do this. And so I think it's been very valuable, and I so appreciate what Tricia said in regard to residential employees being underpaid, and Lisa's discussion regarding being frustrated, and ask you not to be frustrated, because we really are coming together as a group and being able to deal with what's going to happen nationally and also with the governor's budget, et cetera. We have an opportunity, and DHS has opened this to us, to become the solution and problem solvers, rather than have, as I think in the federal side of things, we're going to have some issues that we have no control over and no input into resolution. And I think that's really very important. But part of what I feel from success is taking individual responsibility for my peers to go back and say we need to change things. And we have done that. I have 98% retention of my DSPs, and it's because of changing the culture and how we function and how we operate. So I've been very grateful for these sessions and have listened a great deal. And I think that we are just now reaching the point of being able to have some good problem solving. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Polly, do you have your hand up for this question? Looks like
No, I forgot to take it down. I'm sorry.
No worries. We all do that. So it looks like Lisa's next then.
Okay, so like Sue was saying, true problem solving. So I like what she said there. With the assumption that today is somewhat of a fresh start, I want to recognize that last year we had lots of discussions about true collaboration. I don't think we're there yet. So what I have felt, I'm no expert here on this stuff, but what I have felt for a long time is in order to collaborate and have the non-DHS members of this committee truly feel like we are part of this process, I think the group is very large. And so if we could have an identified small subset that is the voice of the non-DHS members of this committee, the purpose of that small subset would be to be our voice, of course, but help build the agenda for every meeting. I'm assuming today's agenda had 0 input from a non-DHS member. Correct me if I'm wrong. So that's one layer that I think we should consider to keep this productive and under its an initial intent of why we even exist. Other than that, I think we need a new roadmap. We've had that dabbled in the past 2 years, but I think this is a perfect time to establish what is the new roadmap. You kind of had that with the timeline as we go into 25, 26, and 27, but have something that we all can have as a go-to. But the other thing that I want to emphasize that I feel ties into what Sue was saying too, this has gone nowhere in a lot of ways. This is 2 years of RAC existing. So I think for all of us to feel like we're always on the same page and that we are actually making progress, we need to log that progress and show it. You know, as you could take meeting minutes and things, but go deeper than that and kick off every meeting to say, okay, based on last meeting, we have now had agreement on X, Y, and Z. This is where we have suggested recommendations that we've all agreed on. There's just never been clarity about what we want, what we had input on. Is it, I've said this all along, but it is in writing within our charter. This committee, the entire committee, has a say and a duty to create what is presented to our legislature as the change under Waiver Reimagine. We've never seen that document. I don't think it exists, to be honest. And so now more than ever, because of extreme pressure that we're all gonna see by our state budgeting and by what's happening nationally, it's more important than ever to stay on the right page. So to reiterate, I do think we have to have a small subset of us that is truly our voice to collaborate, setting every meeting. We need a new roadmap, and we need to show every meeting our log of success, our log of progress, our log of agreement, voting, whatever that means to get there, but to show that we actually had our voice heard and it matters and it's reaching that legislative proposal. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. As a facilitator, some very concrete feedback there that that I appreciate. So thank you. Pat, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, hi. Pat Wright, dark hair, hazel eyes, senior, on a waiver, son is on a waiver. And yeah, I really like the 2 previous comments and ideas, and to expand on the comment about helping to create the agenda and meeting without meeting as non-DHS staff, let's put it that way. Taking it to another level, being able to have possibly groups of people categorized by family members, individuals on the waiver. Those could maybe be combined, but maybe separate, depending on how people feel, how many people there are. And then agency people. And there might be something else. I'm not totally sure who makes up this group. In terms of what to look for, you know, what I would like to see in 2025. Oh, well, just to say, those groups could possibly meet in between the regular rec meetings, and there could possibly be a representative from each of those smaller groups that could meet to help form the agenda. Also, yeah, there would be what I've noticed. I've been on the rec meeting, too, since we started years ago. And it seems like over time, there's been the issue of one, the process, going through the process, which I highly value. I'm a process person. And two, people that have gotten very frustrated with what have we achieved? Things are the same. There's so much more yet to do, and now we have to start over and da da da. Sorry about this cat toy in the background that I haven't figured out how to turn off. It's making a lot of noise. And I think both are very valuable. I think being able to have a group process that I think that's how we got here. And I think it's important that we got here. And where we are feels really important, where we're feeling like we have voice and we are helping to determine, the forward movement and whatnot. So I'm not sure. Hopefully that's clear, but and I feel like out of that, people being able to listen to each other and ask questions and get more information, that's how things will be done or achieved or goals met, however we want to say that. All right, thank you.
That's great, helpful. And there's some themes coming up for me, and we'll take a couple minutes after comments to just report some of the things we're hearing right now today. This is great. Chad, we'll go to you next.
Sorry about that. Oops. See, my video's not working there. My video's not working for some reason. My name is Chad Wilson. I'm an attorney with the Minnesota Disability Law Center. And I think my comments reflect a lot of what members have already said. I feel like a lot of these recent meetings, and maybe it's because it's this reset, but it seems like it's mostly DHS staff talking at the members. I feel like we've gone away from really talking about specific policies. I think talking so globally about things can be helpful for a point, but we've been doing that repeatedly with this group. So in the past we had it's first started meetings talking about budgets more generally or rate exception processes, things like that. And so if we can have that roadmap to point out those specific issues we want to discuss, I think that can be helpful. A lot of this just being being told about the budget stuff today is great and helpful for people to know if they don't have that information, but you really need to be more specific, I think, as far as, this is the nuance we want to talk about here today and see what the recommendations are and thoughts from members. So to just be, a little more precise with the topics, I think would be helpful.
That's great. Thank you. Let's see, we'll go to Trisha next.
So I have said this, I don't know, countless times. There are best practices that exist about stakeholder engagement and how to facilitate these meetings. We, as members of this group, have great ideas for you, but honestly, you need to just figure it out and do it the right way. You need to just really, if you want to partner with us, follow best practices. Everything that everyone said is outlined. Letting, or intentionally having stakeholders and members of the group be involved and partner and collaborate in setting the agenda, allowing more people to talk, like all of the things that everyone's saying, it's out there. This isn't new news, and we shouldn't have to be the ones to bring it up. I've already sent multiple resources on to DHS staff about this. I would really, and I'm not going to apologize for being passionate about this because I'm really afraid for my family. So I'm just going to say, I think we need to talk budgets so we can keep moving forward, because as we speak, I see a whole bunch of things that I was hoping wouldn't happen at Waiver Reimagine now happening under CDCS unbundling. And so spending more time teaching you guys how partnership looks and how to do it is really frustrating to me. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and you know, just acknowledging that frustration. Here, I'm hearing that. Yeah. Charlene.
Morning. Thank you. I have a bit of a cold, so bear with me. I'm Charlene Abramson. I represent as a recipient of waivers. I'm younger than some, older than others. I am disabled, but I'm working towards the MAEPD program. I'm also a certified peer support specialist. And what I want to do is to learn new ways to find out my limits and my abilities in my disability to work and find a new way to contribute and be someone who can be a peer support specialist in general. So I'm working, the point of this is I'm working towards volunteering on my own to make my own groups, not just about me, but as support for peers. And what I'm offering here is to reach out to me personally to make a peer support group for this Waiver Reimagine group that we've been just talking about. A couple of people expressed interest in kind of an offshoot. And my goal is simply a few things. I'd be following a certified program that was through the state of Minnesota to have kind of some simple guidelines and boundaries. I would like to have sort of support where we kind of trade notes. Maybe there's things some of us know and others don't. A warm and welcome environment that helps people that are new or don't know things. I'm hoping to have information to get to DHS, because how do they know if we don't tell them? And we don't really want to have all these meetings just be of complaints. If we can get our thoughts out and share information amongst ourselves in these off meetings, like you guys had, a couple of you mentioned just a moment ago, I would like to do that and then like maybe compile little surveys for DHS for our meetings so we can have more focused agendas that can get to the point and get further faster. So I'll put my information in the chat and I welcome you to reach out to me so I can build a peer support specialist group for the Reimagine committee. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up at the moment. Does anybody else want to chime in? I'll just reflect back, and Jessica, feel free to chime in, but just some themes that I was hearing across these comments, and thank you. Oh, go ahead, Kelly. You go first. Jump in.
Sorry about that delay. Just, I would like to clarify, because we sort of touched on this many times in past meetings, how I would actually like to see what input that we have provided as RAC members has actually been utilized, other than we named the two waivers. I get it. We help make names. I really can't put my finger on what it is that DHS has put into the RAC or the Waiver Reimagine plan that as that of things that were suggested by us.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I see some thumbs up going in relation to that comment.
Do you see that as a possibility, I guess, is where I'm going with this?
DHS, is that something you want to reflect on a little bit?
Oh, well, I'll jump in and say yes. I think that seems like a reasonable thing. And, you know, depending on how we move forward, having an ongoing rolling update on those things would make sense. What new agreements, what new input has been incorporated? So thanks for that's a great comment.
Yeah, and I mean, just to clarify, I'll give you an example. We sort of heard that Waiver Reimagine was on pause because I think we missed the December meeting, right? Because we were on pause. but yet things are still moving forward, just like other people have talked about the CDCS unbundling. Things are moving forward, even though we're on a pause, which again doesn't really feel good. It feels like things are going to roll out whether or not we have meaningful input or not. And so again, I would also collaborate with everybody else to say that really, if we want to make this a best program for Minnesota, you got to listen to the people that are utilizing the services, because we have a lot of ideas for how to save money. And again, like we talked about, keeping people in the community that are able and willing and have a desire to stay in the community would be step one. You know, I understand we need the residential services, absolutely. But then we haven't even talked about the fluidity of how are people going to go back and forth between these two waivers? Am I going to have my son stuck in a residential setting when he needs that kind of high level care because the min choice backlog is so long? We haven't even to address, like, how is he going to get back into the community part of the waiver? There's so many concerns that I think a lot of us are nervous, and we'd really like a lot more transparency. So two things: would love to see what input has actually been used from this RAC committee for input. And two, I totally agree that we need to have better partnership and collaboration, like we talked about last April when we went in front of the Human Services Committee and had some really great testimony from people in the community that had very valid and similar concerns. Thank you.
Kelly, I just want to reply briefly to say thank you so much for your comments. One of the challenges that we've been working through over the pause, if you will, is how to incorporate the broader perspective of the whole waiver system beyond just Waiver Reimagine, and how to have that engagement. Because yeah, CDCS unbundling is happening. That's not tied directly to Waiver Reimagine, but from your perspective, how do you differentiate? Is it a difference that doesn't make a difference? So appreciate that. Min choices, same thing. So that's part of what we're working through on our end, is how to enable a conversation that's inclusive of all of the topics that touch on Waiver Reimagine. Hope that makes sense, and please push back if it doesn't.
I don't want to push back. Again, I want to work with you on this. It just, you know, CDCS is such a big part of Waiver Reimagine, because I heard from many sessions it's going away and we're going to get self-directed, but we really don't know what self-directed is or what that looks like. So again, that puts fear into people because we have a fear of the unknown, and yet things are moving along. So just, I appreciate your feedback, Curtis, but again, we all want to work with you. This is not a us versus them thing. Let's make this as positive as we can possibly make it be.
Got it. Thanks, Kelly.
That's great. We maybe have, and from Polly, there's a comment in the chat too. If you're not tracking the chat, there's a comment too about agreeing with Chad and the focus on policy and how to weave that in. So really great comments, great discussion here as a facilitator. You know, again, kind of stepping in new to this group. This is great information that Jessica and I can take back and think about what to do with it. You know, some themes that I'm hearing. One is using collaboration best practices. There's a lot of opportunity to, Kate, I see your hand. I'll get through my little outline and then I'll jump to your comment. A lot of opportunity to use those times between meetings to co-create agendas. Potentially, there could be a steering team type structure. There could be many other structures, facilitation-wise, that could be used to really support collaboration best practices. So that's one theme I'm hearing. A second theme I'm hearing is that there needs to be a better job of demonstrating progress. So where are we getting from meeting over meeting? How is feedback being integrated? What is that rolling update, so we can know where we've been, where we're going, and be clear about that. The other thing I've heard is that folks would like to be more in the problem solving space, or what we call in our office collaborative problem solving space. That means we're really wrestling with difficult issues. We're talking budgets, we're talking specific policies, and working through them together. So that's one thing I'm hearing. And then, you know, just reflecting too from the tone I've heard, well, you know, there's some frustration where things are at, and certainly isn't perfect by any means. There still seems to be a really willingness to show up and work on this group and be collaborative and not be us and them, and to come to wise decisions and shared solutions. And I think, just reflecting back to you all, that's amazing. Not all groups that we work with have that spirit, and I think that's a great foundation to build on. So that's my little report out of themes. Jessica, anything to add to that?
You may have mentioned this. I was looking through my notes. Someone used the word roadmap, and I think some other people concurred, like having a project plan with clear milestones seems really important. So that's the only other thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, let's take Dr. Kate's comment, and then we need a few minutes to close out the meeting. There's some final logistical comments. So we'll go to Dr. Kate, and then we'll go from there.
This is Barb. I'm Kate's mom. If you're going to reference things that are said in the chat, you need to read them. Kate can't see them, and it is very distracting to hear you talking and have me try to read them to her at the same time.
Thank you for that awareness. And I'm learning here in this space of how chat is accessible or not accessible to folks. DHS team, maybe you could give me some guidance, with the chat. Does this get printed out later? What's the best way to handle it at this juncture?
We will be including it in our notes. This is Adrienne. As part of, we'll have the transcription, and then we'll also have the chat. That's what I know at this point. So that can be something that we can send out as a follow-up.
Dr. Kate, yes, go ahead.
That's not really an accessible option to send out the chat after the meeting, because then she can't participate in what somebody else has said, and it's extraordinarily frustrating. And because she talks with a computer, it takes too long for her to type out this response, which is why I'm saying it. Best practice is, if you're using chat and you're saying something was in the chat, you need to read it.
Excellent. Okay. That's really important learning for me. And I think that's also really important going forward, that, there's some consideration about how the chat is used productively in this space. I don't know if this has come up before or what the background is. Yeah. Okay. I will just read the comment that I referenced in the chat to make sure that that is there. So Polly Owen said, I agreed with Chad. We need to focus on policy rather than individual issues. The issues individuals are having that are not the scope of this group can be addressed with them outside of this group. There are valuable issues, but this isn't always the space for it. Once we have the policies determined, we can have small groups on individual policy decisions that have been made. And I thought that's what this group would be. That is how other DHS work groups I have been part of over the last 40 years have worked. As I said before, if DHS is able to act as a partner in discussions, it will help move things forward. I have suggested using an outside facilitator before, so I'm happy that we have some more neutral facilitation. I have done a ton of person-centered planning facilitation, and it is almost impossible to facilitate if you really need to be part of the discussion or the decision-making team or to have a stake in the outcome. So that's a great comment and a great reflection on facilitation as well. So making sure we got that comment into the discussion here. Okay. Any final comments before we turn it over? I think we'll turn it over. So as a reminder, Jessica and I, you'll be hearing more from our office via email about continuing some of this feedback and this discussion outside of the large group space, which it sounds like there's some interest in. So that's great. I'll turn it back over to Curtis for some closeout logistics. And I think there was a slide to come back up.
All right, folks. Hi, Curtis Buman here again. Gonna start closing out the meeting. Just a reminder that our next meeting is set for, oh gosh, and I didn't have the calendar page up right here. I believe it's April 24th. Well, there it is on the slide. I also want to point out that we have some open committee seats, and I'm wondering, Adrian Hennard, if I can have you come off of mute just to talk a little bit about what's going on with those.
For sure. Yep. We have currently 7 open rack seats. So nobody's terms expiring this year, 2025 or 2024. But through resignations, et cetera, we have now, the website shows that we have 4 seats, but I'll update it this week, and we have 7. So we'll have 2 advocate seats, 4 seats for people who use waiver services. 2 of those are like general, and then 1 is specific to Greater Minnesota, and 1 specific to the Metro. And then I believe we'll have 1 open spot for a parent seat for a parent with a child under 21. So typically we've done these open seats kind of at the end of the calendar year, so December time. We wanted to have this meeting just to connect and have the existing RAC members come back together after the announcement of the timeline change and having this discussion. So following this meeting, we'll be sending an e-list announcement out. We always ask that you all, reach out to your networks as well and share these opportunities. We try to leave that the application process is always open, but we'll be reviewing these applications to make recommendations to the commissioners how it goes. Hopefully end of March is when I hope to start reviewing the application. So we'll leave it open for at least 2 to 3 weeks after we announce the opportunity on the e-list. So let anyone know they can feel free to apply, and they can reach out to me if you have questions or other people have questions. And I think that's my update on the RAC open seats.
Thanks, Adrian. I think that wraps us up. Did I forget anything out of the closeout? Otherwise, we'll close out the meeting. I appreciate everybody's attendance today. Fantastic feedback. And we'll plan on seeing you all in April, on April 24th. Thanks, everyone.
Could I say one thing really quickly?
Oh, please.
This is Pat. Yeah, we haven't had a member directory, a member contact list in a long time. Is that something that we can do again sometime?
Sure. Is that something that was sent out in the past?
Yeah, a couple of years ago,
Okay.
I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great.
All right.
Thanks.
Okay.
Great suggestion, Pat.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, again, I'll close this out unless there is a last call. Otherwise, we're going. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.